Mariana shaded her eyes and frowned at her phone in the bright morning sunlight. She'd just gotten a text from Scotty saying, "Come meet us at the dragon tree before school. Ian wants to tell us something." She messaged back, "Be right there," and she headed for the park with leaden feet. Her stomach was fluttering and flip-flopping with anxiety. Trooping into the principal's office to confront him about Mrs. Blackmoore had seemed like a great idea last night, but her resolve appeared to have shriveled up and died overnight. The absolute last thing she wanted to do was step foot inside the school. At the same time, scuttling back to the house and hiding under the bed wouldn't make the situation go away. Mrs. Blackmoore would steal another classmate today, and tomorrow, and every day until she was forced to flee to another town and another identity. She would continue with her grisly harvest until someone finally gathered the courage to stand against her. Unfortunately, that someone was going to have to be Mariana and her two dorky friends. The dragon tree was an enormous weeping willow in the south end of the park. As the three of them got older, the dragon tree looked less and less like a dragon every year, but the name had stuck. It was a convenient meeting spot that afforded a modicum of privacy beneath the hanging folds of its branches. The perfect headquarters for three kids who all lived just a few blocks away from the park. Mariana entered the park through the north gate and headed for the tree at a brisk pace. She dreaded hearing whatever it was that Ian wanted to tell them. There was very little chance it would be good news. She saw Scotty peeking out from between the sagging branches, a pale, skinny oval of a face topped with unruly red hair. She waved at him, and Scotty stared at her blankly in return, not smiling or waving back. He abruptly pulled back and disappeared behind the foliage, leaving Mariana with her arm in the air and a greeting on the tip of her tongue. Mariana slowed to a stop, a frown increasing her brow as an inexplicable chill made gooseflesh stand on her arms in the warm sunshine. That wasn't very Scotty-like behavior at all. Something must be wrong. She dodged around a group of smaller kids and approached the dragon tree with screaming nerves. She braced herself for bad news and stepped through the branches, blinking owlishly as her eyes adjusted to the relative gloom on the other side. Scotty was standing nearby, leaning against the trunk of the tree and staring at her with that blank expression on his face. Mariana looked around and asked, "Where's Ian? I thought he was supposed to be here." Scotty looked at her and said nothing. Mariana waited for a response, then yelled, "Earth to Scott, hello? What's wrong? Why are you..." Mariana trailed off as Scotty's head suddenly detached from his body, drifting off his shoulders and floating to a soft landing on the ground near her feet. His body melted away into scattered shadows, there and gone in a heartbeat. Mariana gaped at the empty spot where he'd just been standing. She reached down with trembling hands to pick up his head, which was actually a white balloon with a bunch of lines scrawled in red marker for hair. His face consisted of 2 dots for eyes and a single slash for a mouth, both hastily drawn with a black marker. She instantly recognized the scent of the marker ink. It smelled exactly like the markers they used in school. And was the balloon a leftover from Molly Rogers' birthday 3 weeks ago? Was it? A large hand clamped down on her shoulder, and Mariana's thoughts scattered into a cloud of incoherent panic. The hand twirled her around, and Mariana found herself looking up at Mrs. Blackmoore. She sneered. "I'm sorry to ruin your fun, but the reality is that dragons were just sickly little worms, hardly bigger than a crocodile. Do you think that old, blowhard St. George would have managed to kill a lizard the size of a willow tree? Oh, please. The man was long past his prime and utterly riddled with syphilis. What was Miss Wright teaching you empty-headed little cretins anyway? Certainly not the facts, that's for sure." Mariana couldn't move. Not one single muscle in her entire being. She could only look on helplessly from the windows of her eye sockets, a prisoner in her own body. "Still, you're a good deal brighter than most of the others, aren't you?" she crooned. "Your mind, your spark so bright. Mercy, yes. Such a fine addition to my collection." Mariana was trying to scream, but her throat was locked up tighter than a bank vault, and her tongue was pinned on the roof of her mouth. All she could manage was a low, burbling groan that was lost beneath the noisy background of morning traffic, tittering songbirds, and the stream of children's laughter who were cutting through the park on their way to school. Mrs. Blackmoore gave her a curled smile and a knowing nod. "The bad ones always kick up a fuss when it's time to go in the bag. They try and scream and run, and every once in a blue moon, one of you horrible little brats gets away from me." Mrs. Blackmoore leaned in close, her eyes glinting with dull flickers of red and green in the gloom, and she snarled, "But rest assured, dearie, it's never for long. I'll get your friends too, both of them, and into the bag they'll go, brat, just like you." Mrs. Blackmoore held up her bag, its leering zipper of a mouth gaping wide in anticipation. Mariana heard a distant cacophony of countless souls, all of them lost and wailing in the dark. The substitute grabbed her by the back of the neck and grunted, "Get in there, bright one! Get into your new— Ow! You nasty little beast!" Mrs. Blackmoore jerked her hand away and did a mad little dance of pain, shaking her hand in the air and then clutching it close to her chest. She squealed, "Take it off! Take it off right now and get in the bag!" Mariana touched her necklace, a simple chain made of silver, and she pulled it out of her shirt, holding it in front of her like a cross in a vampire movie. Mariana began to advance on Mrs. Blackmoore, who fell back with a frightened snarl on her lips. She grunted, "You don't like this much, do you?" And Mrs. Blackmoore violently shook her head no. "It burns," she panted. "Hateful silver! I'll tear off your ears for doing that! There was a dull thud, and Mrs. Blackmoore fell to her knees, clutching the back of her head with a startled squawk of pain. Ian was standing behind her, raising a second large rock above his head with his lips twisted in a desperate grimace. He brought it down with all the force he could muster, and Mrs. Blackmoore fell onto her face in the dirt. Mariana shrilled, "Oh my God! Did you just kill her?" "I wouldn't bet on it," Ian gasped. "Come on, let's go." They fled into the sunlight, the soles of their sneakers slapping the pavement in a frantic rhythm as they ran for their lives. Behind them, Mrs. Blackmoore crawled out from beneath the dragon tree and screeched, "Go ahead! Run as fast as you can! I'll find you!" Ian said, "Call Scotty," and he put on a burst of speed. Mariana pulled out her phone and dialed Scotty's cell number, still running as she held the phone to her ear. She listened to it ring on the other end and panted, "Answer your phone, idiot! Answer your stupid phone! Come on! She's coming!" Unlike either of his friends, Scotty had slept like a baby the night before, and he hadn't thought about Mrs. Blackmoore even once that entire evening. Mariana had called to tell him they were going to meet up in the morning to talk about the substitute, but he honestly had no idea why. She was a weird, spooky lady or whatever, sure, like, really weird. But what were they supposed to do? Call the weird lady police and have her tossed in a weird lady jail? They didn't have any evidence that she'd done anything wrong, for crying out loud. For someone who was supposed to be smart, Mariana could be awfully dumb. Scotty was honestly more concerned about Ian. Poor guy almost walked into traffic like a zombie, and he didn't even take the bait for Scotty's joke last night. Obviously, the boy wasn't feeling right in the head, because that joke was friggin' mint. Anyone could have seen that, even a humorless ass monkey like Ian. Scotty ate his usual breakfast that morning, a mixing bowl of Count Chocula cereal, and he bounced off the front door with his customary manic zest for life. He was supposed to meet Mariana and Ian at the front entrance before school started, but he was already thinking that maybe he'd just dodge into the side door and catch up with them at recess. Maybe Mrs. Blackmoore wouldn't even be here today, who knows? She was a substitute. They came and went like the tides. Scotty rounded the corner and nimbly dodged around a cranky-looking man with a slight limp. He had two small kids trailing behind him, both with sullen expressions that spoke of a recent yelling from dear old Dad. The man looked at Scotty and snarled, "Watch it, not in the mood right now, buddy." Scotty shot back, "That's what your wife says, buddy," and skipped away from the onslaught of righteous indignation that followed. When he was a safe distance away, Scotty looked back and hollered, "Stop trying to touch my bathing suit areas! What the hell, dude?" The man flashed as red as a beet and hurried on his way. Scotty crossed the street, chuckling at his own sharp wit, and then something unusual caught his ear. He stopped to listen, his smile fading a bit, and he heard it again. Bang! Ring! The tinny ring of a tarnished old bell floated through the mid-spring air. A moment later, Mrs. Blackmoore came rolling into view in an old-fashioned penny-farthing bicycle. Scotty scrambled behind a mailbox and watched in slack-jawed shock as she zipped past on her comical bicycle and rolled down the street. She was wearing leather driving gloves and a pair of aviator goggles. The hem of her dress snapped and fluttered behind her as she pumped the pedals with her square-toed boots, grinning her ferocious grin as she rang the bell with childish glee. She thundered, "Excuse me, sir!" and zoomed between Dad and his children with scant inches to spare on either side. They didn't even seem to notice her. Her towering bicycle growled at them with a whirring of its spokes, an unprecedented beast on wheels. Mrs. Blackmoore pedaled around the man and his children in looping circles as they marched out of view, cawing mad laughter and ringing the bell. She cried, "Has anyone seen a red-headed boy walk past here by any chance? He's a very bad boy, you know. He and his friends are all nasty, horrible little tattletales." The man and his children kept walking. None of them showed any reaction at all to this bizarre spectacle, not so much as a puzzled glance over their shoulders. A sudden metallic taste of fear stung the inside of Scotty's tongue. This was more than just weird. It was simply not possible. There was no way this was actually happening. Mrs. Blackmoore quickly tired of harassing the man and his children and pedaled away down the street, ringing her bell and heckling passers-by along the way. No one reacted to this insanity in the slightest. She was invisible to them. "Where's her bag?" Scotty muttered, and he realized that Mrs. Blackmoore was currently sitting on the damn thing. Her handbag had transformed into an old-timey bicycle. A spidery and gothic-looking contraption that was straight out of the days of cholera and heavily waxed mustaches. As he watched her turn the corner, Scott nimbly wondered if her magic satchel could also take on the shape of a broomstick. He scampered into the street and flapped his arms like a maniac at oncoming traffic. He needed to vacate the area and needed to do it right now before Mrs. Blackmoore circled back around the block. Sooner or later, she'd find him, and no one would see it happen. No one would hear his screams. A black SUV hybrid screeched to a halt. An irate-looking woman with mirrored sunglasses rolled down her window to yell, "What the fuck, kid? Get out of the road!" Scott ran up to the passenger side door and frantically tugged on the handle. "Let me in!" he pleaded. His mind raced to find a substitute of evil witch lady on a huge bike, something that didn't sound quite as batshit crazy. He took a deep breath and hissed, "Some guy running around naked under his coat!" The lock clicked open and Scott scrambled inside. He slammed the door, shouting, "He's coming after us! Go!" Scott pretended to point out the fictional sex deviant as he advanced on them, but the driver of the SUV didn't even turn her head. Instead, she let out an ear-piercing shriek and stomped on the gas. "What happened?" she demanded. "Did he get you?" Scotty gasped. "He didn't get me. I ran away. I need to talk to the police." "I'll take you there," the woman exclaimed. Her voice was strained to a potent mixture of fear and outrage. "I can't believe he came after us like that. Did you see that? He had his thing out." "I know, it's crazy." Scotty was only half listening to the driver's excited babbling. He was too busy keeping an eye peeled for Mrs. Blackmoore. "Tried to get us." "That's what they do," the driver explained, and she pounded the horn with the heel of her palm, making Scotty almost jump out of his skin. "He's not gonna get away with it. What's your name, kid?" It's Ian," Scotty said. And despite the situation, he had to suppress a grin. "My friends call me Spanky, though." The woman patted his head absently, her attention temporarily diverted by a Jetta that was ambling along at 10 under the limit. She grunted. "Pleased to meet you, Sparky. My name's Candace." In the same breath, she roared, "Get out of the way, dumbass! Some people have places to go!" Scotty's explosive new acquaintance forced her way into the right lane and aggressively overtook the offending Jetta, riding on the bumper of the car ahead of her until she could cut out in front of her nemesis with hardly more than a few feet to spare. The Jetta blasted its horn in indignation. Candace responded by sticking her arm out of the window and flipping the bird. She roared, "Eat a bag of dog shit, fuckface!" To Scotty, she muttered, "Can't wait to file a report against that sick bastard, Spanky. Not the Jetta, the other guy with his thing hanging out. I'm not leaving until the cops take our information." "Yeah," Scotty nodded. "They'll get him. Cops will..." "Oh, hey! Turn left to the stop sign. It's faster that way." Scotty was staring out his window in open-mouthed horror. They were pulling up to a T intersection, and down the street to their right, Mrs. Blackmoore was performing a perfect handstand from the handles of her bicycle as she rolled along the center line. Her skirt was standing up straight in the air, defying gravity in a darkly comical show of modesty. Unreality washed over him, threatening to drown him in a sludgy wave of nervous exhaustion. Candace turned left without question. She was too busy recounting the details of their imaginary brush with a predator, presumably to get things straight in her mind before they spoke with the police. Scotty just kept nodding his head and saying, "Yeah, I know, right?" or "I think so." Whichever seemed more appropriate when a pause in her diatribe demanded a response. All he wanted was for the lady to shut up for a second and give him a chance to gather himself before he started talking. If he had started screaming, he didn't think he'd be able to stop. They hit a red light a few minutes down the road, and Scotty's entire being went wire-taut with tension. Candace patted his hand again and assured him, "You're safe, kid. No one's following us. I've been watching." A shabby-looking man in a grimy old sun hat shuffled into the intersection and began to wander down the line of waiting vehicles, carrying a plastic bucket in one hand and clutching a gas station squeegee in the other. Scotty watched his progress with narrowed eyes. One of these people," Candace scowled. "He better not touch my truck. No, thank you." The man lurched up to the SUV and motioned at the windshield with his squeegee. Candace answered with a sharp blast of her horn. He flinched in surprise and slouched away, clearly mouthing, "Fuck you too, lady," as she at her through the window as he shambled out of view. Scotty's phone started vibrating in his pocket. It was Mariana, and she sounded out of breath. "Where the heck are you? Listen, plans have changed. We're not meeting at school anymore. She's after us. We're going straight to the police." "All right, I'm on my way," Scotty snapped back at her. "I had to flag down some lady in her truck to get away. She's taking me to the police station right now." "Who's that?" Candace demanded. "Was that perv bothering someone else too? Oh, speaking of bothering, that bum is coming back. He can just stay the hell away from my truck." Candace was glaring daggers into her side view mirror. Her upper lip curled in disgust. She unrolled her window and bellowed, "The fucking light is about to change, asshole!" There was a blur of motion outside, and Candace's head jerked back from the force of a tremendous blow. Whunk! Her eyes rolled back, and she fell forward against the steering wheel, blood pouring from a deep indent in her forehead. Scotty flinched back against the passenger door and let out a high-pitched scream. Mrs. Blackmoore leered at him triumphantly through the driver's side window, the homeless man's sun hat cocked on her head at a rankish angle. Her grimy bucket had been replaced by her handbag. She reached through the window and stabbed the unlock button with a blunt fingertip. Clunk. "Hello, young man," she boomed with a homicidal good cheer. "It's time to get in the bag, my boy. Hop in!" Scotty threw open his door and hit the pavement running. The heavy clunk of Mrs. Blackmore's boots drew ever closer as he sprinted for the nearest escape route, a low wooden fence that bordered someone's backyard. He vaulted over it with the grace of an Olympic gymnast and dashed through an obstacle course of rusting tricycles and faded plastic toys. Behind him, there was an explosive crack as Mrs. Blackmoore came bursting through the fence like a bulldozer, sending a shower of splinters and chunks of lumber flying through the air. She bellowed, "There's nowhere to run, brat!" And Scotty wailed with terror. He scampered through a series of newly planted flower beds in the front yard and blindly ran into the street. He charged across the path of a full-sized cargo van and narrowly missed getting plowed over by 3 windmilling steps. Behind him, there was a tremendous bang, and the driver locked up the brakes, sliding into a screeching halt in the middle of the street. The shaken driver leapt out of the van and bellowed, "Hey, kid! Did y'all just throw something in my van, you little piece of shit?" Scotty didn't spare a breath to answer him. He ran another 4 blocks before he staggered to a halt in front of a variety store, his lungs burning like fire in his chest. He couldn't run anymore. He had to hide. It was going to take a lot more than getting hit by a cargo van to stop Mrs. Blackmoore. A lot more. The elderly man behind the counter took his terrified expression and grunted. "My God, boy, what happened to you?" Don't tell her I'm here," Scotty panted. "She'll kill us both." He scrambled past the counter and headed for the back of the store. The man behind the counter started after him and hollered, "Where do you think you're going? You, boy, come back here!" Scotty whirled to face him and shouted, "Listen to me. A lady's gonna walk in here in a minute, okay? A tall lady wearing all black. Don't tell her I'm here. If you do, she'll kill us both. I'm not kidding, mister. I'm sorry for yelling, but this is not a joke." The clerk stopped in his tracks, stunned to uncertainty by the sheer panic in his voice. Faintly, he asked, "What is this again?" There was no time to make a story up on the fly. Not this time. The elderly gent in the forest green trousers was simply going to have to swallow the truth. "She might look like someone else," Scotty croaked. His voice was raspy and dry. "She could wear something that belongs to someone else and look exactly like them. She can make herself invisible. She can do lots of things, mister. You won't be able to stop her." Slowly, the old man asked, "And why would this woman be chasing you?" Scotty almost said because I'm a tattletale, and he burped up an unsteady giggle. She calls herself Mrs. Blackmoore. I doubt that's her real name. She's chasing me and my friends because we know the truth about her. She steals people. She puts them in her handbag. You're pulling my leg, boy, the clerk grunted. It's nonsense. What happened to you? Tell me the truth. Scotty stomped his foot and shrieked, This lady's gonna kill you. She'll rip you apart and she'll do something even worse to me. You have to hide me somewhere until she's gone. Please, she's coming. The old man gawked at him through thick, square lenses of his glasses. And after a stunned moment of silence, he said, Go in the broom closet. Last door on the back. There's nothing to steal in there. Scotty was already closing the door to the broom closet behind him. The clerk rapped lightly on the other side and told him, I'll wait 15 minutes before I call the police. Not 1 second longer. Scotty croaked, She'll be here any minute. Don't say a word. Before long, Scotty heard the muted ding of a bell as someone came into the store. The clerk's soft sole shoes whispered across the faded tile as he huffed his way back to the counter. Scotty held his breath and listened. Yes, how can I help you? A husky voice drawled. Can I ask you something, sir? Scotty bit down on a scream. It was the driver of the cargo van. He recognized his voice, but was it really the driver? He doubted it. He doubted it very much. Looking for my son. Me and him had it out this morning and took off running. I'm worried about him. Have you seen him? Scotty cowered in the very farthest corner of the little closet, standing in the mop sink and hugging himself as tightly as he could. Don't tell her, he thought. Come on, man, please don't tell her. Slowly, the clerk said, Your son, what does he look like? Scotty forced himself to peek through the crack between the door and the frame. He saw Mrs. Blackmoore standing in front of the counter. She was stuffed into a pair of blue overalls. The arms and legs were both several inches too short for her, exposing pale, veiny wrists and shins. They looked a lot like the overalls the van driver had been wearing. They were covered in large, irregular patches of maroon that appeared to be bloodstains. The trusty handbag dangling from her hand like a kitten being carried by the scruff of its neck. Her bag appeared to be frowning at this undignified treatment. My son is about this tall. He's got bright red hair. Might look kind of banged up. I smacked him for cursing at his mother. That's why he ran off. Mrs. Blackmoore shook her head in mock sadness. He was always a good kid, real good kid. I'm worried it might be drugs. Scotty's gaze flicked to the convex mirror mounted in the upper corner of the room, and he did a double take. In the mirror, Mrs. Blackmoore appeared to be a burly man in his early 40s, heavily bearded with a touch of gray in his hair. The coveralls he was wearing were free of rips and clotted splotches of dried blood. The handbag was a stainless steel lunch pail. He thought, I could see her because she doesn't know that I'm looking. The old man cleared his throat and said, I apologize, sir, but I cannot help you. Scotty felt his knees go weak in relief. Thank you, oh my God, thank you. I haven't seen your son, the old man continued, but if I do, who should I contact? Mrs. Blackmoore held up a finger to silence him, her face suddenly alert. She sniffed the air like a dog that caught an interesting scent, her nostrils flaring as she skinned her lips back from her teeth. No, you've seen him, you filthy liar, she sighed. He's been in here. I can smell him. Scotty's stomach dropped into her shoes. Of course she could smell him. Why not? She was a predator, wasn't she? The old man took a step back from his side of the counter, his polite smile frozen on his face. He spluttered, What is that? I can smell him, Mrs. Blackmoore repeated. He stinks like a nasty little troublemaker. She seized the front of the coveralls and tore them away with one quick, hard jerk of her arms. Rip! She threw them aside and crowded close to the counter, a monolithic figure draped in flowing sheaves of black. The clerk stared up at her darkening, gleeful face with eyes like saucers. He gasped, Gott im Himmel. Oh my God. And Mrs. Blackmoore pantomimed a bored yawn. No one's seen him since Moses, she sneered. I don't think he comes around much anymore. The old man croaked, Are you a witch? and Mrs. Blackmore's ill-tempered smirk melted into a frown. She plopped her bag on top of the lottery ticket display and planted her hands on her hips. Mercy, that's an offensive slur, Mr. Grouper. I'll have you know that I am not in league with the devil, as far as I can tell. The devil doesn't even exist. I'm just in tune with the natural world around us. That's all. It just so happens that your definition of the natural world is a lot different than mine. The clerk looked completely shocked. He whispered, How do you know my real name? Mute as a rock, blind as a stone. The root where you stand, she chanted, and the clerk ceased in function. It was as if he'd been turned off with a switch. He was alive and animated one second, and a motionless mannequin the next. Mrs. Blackmoore turned her back to him and sniffed the air again. She smiled. I know you're in here, boy, she called out. Once again, you put me in a difficult position. I can't allow this man to live, can I? His death will be on your soul, my child, not mine. And poor Candace. She may have been a quarrelsome scold, but she didn't deserve to go out like that. Mrs. Blackmoore clicked her tongue in scorn. If it weren't for you, she would still be alive. Do you see now? Do you see why you must follow the rules? Loose lips sink ships. I'm fucked, Scotty thought, and tears started to leak down his cheeks. I'm so completely fucked right now. You can't hide from me, child, she called out. I was once forced to serve as a bloodhound for an Irish war king. It's been a long time, but I assure you I can still track a scent. Mrs. Blackmoore began to literally follow her nose, snuffling at the air as she shuffled to the back of the store. She dropped to her hands and knees in front of the cold case, sniffing at the floor as she grinned through her hair. The king would offer condemned criminals a choice. They could place their heads on a chopping block, or they could try and evade the hunt and possibly win their freedom. He would release them at the edge of the forest, and then I'd be set on their trail. I was better than any hound the king had ever owned, or so he was prone to saying when he was in his cups. For 18 miserable years, I led the hunt with my nose in the dirt, and my robes dangling through the dead leaves. I ate scraps from the bastard's supper table and slept in a kennel. I suffered these indignities and bided my time because I knew that no king is infallible forever. Their time will always come in the end. Mrs. Blackmoore rose to her feet and sauntered toward the broom closet, her booted heel clunking on the floor in a deliberate rhythm. Mr. Gruber stood frozen in the background, gazing at nothing, with his features hanging in a slack non-expression. Scotty crammed himself back into the corner of the broom closet. Standing in the mop sink with the cold water tap digging into his back, he could hear his teeth chattering behind his lips. When the king was disposed by his rival, I decided to stage a hunt of my own. He thought he'd thrown me off his scent by crossing the river, but the poor old bugger slipped on the embankment and broke his leg. He soiled himself and screamed for his mother when he saw me coming for him, and I don't blame him one bit. There was 18 years of humiliation to answer for, a heavy debt he paid in full. The light beneath the door disappeared, blocking out a towering shape on the other side. Mrs. Blackmoore pattered her fingertips against the door in a rapid rhythm, mimicking a drum roll. It ended with a wood-cracking blow from her fist. Patter, 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 wham! Ian flinched and stifled a whimper. The king suffered 1,000 deaths on that day. Oh, mercy, yes, the poor dear suffered quite terribly. The closet door slammed open, and Scotty squealed in terror. At that precise moment, there was the muted jingle of a bell as someone walked through the front door. Not just someone. It was a uniformed police officer. The cop tossed out an absent-minded, "Morning, Heinrich," and strolled past the counter without a second glance at Mr. Gruber, who was still frozen in place like a grotesque mannequin. He swaggered up to the coffee counter and started fixing himself a large coffee. Mrs. Blackmoore gaped at him in disbelief. "Crazy out here today, old fellow," he said, stirring milk into his brew. "The wackadoodles are out in full force. All kinds of shit's going on out there." "Officer!" Scotty screeched. Watch out, she's gonna kill you! The cop whirled in the direction of the voice and drew his gun at the same time, dropping his coffee and hauling his sidearm from its holster in one smooth motion. He found himself pointing a gun at a square-jawed woman in indeterminate age, tall and broad in her flowing black garments. He'd been on the job for close to 15 years, and in that time, he'd developed a sixth sense for bad guys and wackadoodles. He immediately knew that this woman was in one or both categories. Why didn't I lock that damn door? Mrs. Blackmoore snapped, and she started advancing on him. The cop pointed his firearm at her and said, Lady, I don't know what your story is, but I think you better stay right where you are. He cast a quick glance over at Mr. Gruber and snapped, Heinrich, what the hell's going on here? The cop trailed off when he noticed Mr. Gruber's bizarre state of non-animation. Mrs. Blackmoore was still clomping along, steadily closing the distance between them with a big, scissoring stride. The officer curled his finger around the trigger and bellowed, Stop, or I will shoot! Get down on the ground! Do as you please, sir, she grinned, and the cop squeezed off 4 rapid shots in response. At the same instant, Mrs. Blackmoore dissolved into a cloud of black mist. The shots hit the cold case with an explosion of glass and a rainbow of fizzing liquids. As fragments of glass and carbonated sugar water rained onto the floor, the mist shot forward in a rolling wave, and in the blink of an eye, it resolved as Mrs. Blackmoore. She yelled, Gotcha, Flatfoot! And seized the hulking cop's forearm. She folded it backwards at the elbow. Snap! And the cop let loose a quavering, high-pitched scream. The gun fell from his nerveless hand, and he whirled from the door, his broken arm flopping uselessly at his side. The substitute cackled feral laughter and hammered him with a brutal punch to the kidneys. Whump! The cop's scream was abruptly cut off by a straggling grunt. He dropped into the fetal position and writhed on the floor. Mrs. Blackmoore tutted at him in a disappointed tone and pinned him with a boot heel on his throat. He gagged and yanked at her foot with his good hand, his legs kicking spastically as she struggled to escape. She threw her hands up in exasperation and called out, Look! Do you see, Scott? Do you see what you've made me do, you nasty little brat? This is very inconsiderate. Killing everyone in the whole damn town is not how you live to see your 6,000th birthday. Strangling beneath the unyielding pressure in his throat, the cop gagged, Get off my neck! Mrs. Blackmoore ignored him. She summoned Scotty to come out of his hiding place with a lazy twitch of her finger. A schoolmarm preparing to pete out corporal punishment against a defiant pupil. Her eyes flashed a blazing scarlet and she snarled, You should have been crushed beneath the wheels of that van, my boy. That would have been merciful compared to what I have in store for you. She twisted her foot with a grinding motion, and the cop abruptly went limp. Scotty burst into tears, and Mrs. Blackmoore started to laugh. Oh, they do cry, don't they? They do cry when the end is near. She stepped off the policeman's neck, still grinning, and she slowly made her way back to the broom closet. Scotty stuffed himself into the corner again and covered his face with his hands. The end was near, and there was nothing he could do to save himself. It was time to get in the bag. Hey guys, I just want to make sure that all of you take a look in the description down below for multiple different reasons. The main reason I'm talking about right now, though, is to look at the author's links. Every time that I do a story on one of these platforms, I post links from the authors. Some of them are books that the authors put out. If you like the stories that you hear, then I highly, highly encourage you to go scroll down, take a look in the description, click one of those links. If you like that author, I guarantee you they have something else that you're going to like. And if they have a book out there, you're going to love that book. I mean, hell, that's how Tales from the Gas Station became what it is, okay? If you guys heard it on YouTube, then hey, there are more, bigger, better versions of it out there that you can get on Amazon or Audible or No Sleep or what have you. So for reals, scroll down, check out the links. And that's not like an advertisement thing. I'm just like, look, this is for your benefit. Check it out. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. Thank you so much. A very big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Reaper61167, Bobby Karman, Tristain, Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Thicky McQuicky, SamaHigh, CrusaderChocobo, SpookyShel, Atomaurus, Grand Moth the Milky, Big Smoke 369, Captain Scurvy, SaltyIrishPoet, Estebean, Brayden Morris, Nate Kuhl, HorrorFan1212, Hour Minute Second Time, Kyle Reznak, David Martin, Scare-ington the Unkempt, Robert Malcolm, Angelus, Spanky, Snoochie Boochie, Seclude, Lupita Galvin, That Creepy Chick, Tyler Fletcher, Merxenum, Red Shadowcat, Xavier the Cheyenne, Demix, Sean Cadieu-baker, 6 Gay Rats in a Trenchcoat, Turtleman, Rob Like Sharp Things, Cryolinian, Xavier Graphius, Lord Life's Best, Goring Tremagacy, Maria Walker, Emily Mitchell, Crazy Kid, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Eka Limchok, Dirt Diver 030, Matt Bach, Voice of Sand, Coffee Zombie, Hidden Tiger, Shelly J, Jeremy H, Psychomel, Nana, Deleted Account, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Darth Miver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Bardo Hawk 764, Lambda M98, Harley, Sashi Suzaku, Cronut 509, Kaylee Ambrose, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Benjamin Welvret, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiwi the Sloth, Fester's Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. As always, thank you guys so much, because you guys help me do everything that I do here. You guys help pay authors for stories and commission stories and do everything that I can do to make this channel and make this podcast the best it could possibly be. So thank you all for supporting me here. And as always, everyone, sweet dreams.